Here is a world of communication, bringing together all people in a new era of understanding.
Elektrischer Reporter.
Gott sei Dank, liebe Zuschauer daheim an den Empfangsgeräten oder von wo auch immer Sie uns gerade zusehen, Gott sei Dank habe er Leute, die für ihn das Internet bedienen. Seufzte einst vor laufender Kamera Michael Gloß, seines Zeichens Bundesminister für Wirtschaft und Technologie. Der Technologieminister ist mit solcherlei Technologie-Ignoranz nicht allein. Etliche Zeitgenossen halten das Netz nach wie vor für eine Mischung aus Versandhauskatalog und elektronischer Tageszeitung, kurz für ein nettes Kann, aber kein Muss. Auf der anderen Seite der Relevanzeinschätzungsskala stehen Leute wie der New Yorker Professor Clay Shirky, der in seinem jüngsten Buch Here Comes Everybody das Auftauchen des Internet mit dem Beginn der industriellen Revolution vergleicht. Über dieses, jenes und anderes habe ich mich neulich mit Clay Shirky unterhalten.
I think the biggest misunderstanding now is the idea that the internet is a decoration or a new addition to contemporary society. It seems fairly obvious to me, watching particularly young people as I do in a college setting use the internet, that it's actually changing society as it goes. It's not just a decoration on contemporary society. As we know, with the invention of the printing press or with the telephone, these really major changes in communications patterns. A society that has telephones is a different kind of thing than a society that doesn't have telephones. But in the same way, a society that has the internet is a different kind of thing than a society that doesn't. So I think there are still a lot of people who think, well, we have life the way it always was, and now we've added this internet thing on top. It's like, no, you've added the internet underneath, and it's going to be bubbling up through everything now. In the United States, our air traffic control system is antiquated and poorly run, as I think is no secret. And since the 90s, people have been lobbying for passengers' rights, right? Some formal recognition that you can't just keep people stuck in these planes when they're sitting on the tarmac. And the industry's fought that off successfully for 10 years. Then all of a sudden, last winter, one woman, Kate Hanna, gets off the plane. She's been stuck on it for 8 hours on the tarmac after they landed. She's angry. She starts a weblog. She starts an online petition site, and in 8 months she gets the law changed, and now it's done out of nowhere. And I think that the ability of a group of people who care about something but aren't otherwise connected to one another, coordinated, their ability to find each other, decide what to do, and take action without needing to first raise dues or incorporate or go to another organization, that's a sea change, right? When a group of people, whether large or small, want to get something done together, just the raw capability that's in their hands now it's qualitatively different from even 10 years ago. My first answer is to admit that they have a point, right? There is as much as Keene is an absolute pessimist in his gathering of these stories, my tribe, I'm embarrassed to say, has people who are absolute optimists, right? Everything about the internet is good, it's going to be this bright, shiny new future, and it's simply not true, right? There are all kinds of negative effects that come about from the internet, and I think particularly debating Keene, what I've said is essentially, we need to figure out which negative effects are things that are a side effect of getting something better, right? More access to information it's a raw social good. That's a good thing. There are people who've been in gatekeeper roles who don't like it, right? But any more than buggy whip manufacturers liked it when cars came along. That's one of the things that's a price you pay for being in an innovative society. Then there's other things where it really is the value that's being broken really has to be re-embraced by society in some other way. The thing that's keeping me awake at nights now is investigative journalism, right? Movie reviewers, sportscasters, right? The bloggers are fine for that. They do a better job in many cases than the magazines. But hardcore, months-long investigative journalism is really really hard to create in any other way than the current system. And the current system, the pressures around the current media system with advertising are making that kind of investigative journalism really hard to do. So what I say about the pessimists in general is 90% of those complaints are really just complaints about people who are afraid of innovation because it might disrupt their current setting. But that's showbiz. We really need to be figuring out what are the cases where this isn't about someone losing their job, but rather society losing a critical capability. And there are not as many of those cases as people think, but they're getting lost in the larger pessimistic conversation. I think we should really be focusing on journalism not as a source of jobs for people, but really journalism as professional truth-telling in society. And how do we make sure that that is as robust in the new world as it was in the old world? The internet is really the first thing we've ever had that is really a medium, right? We talk about media all the time, but in fact, everything is purpose-built, right? Telephones are for two-way voice, whereas magazines are for broadcast print. And the internet's enormous strength is to be a real medium, right? It is a general purpose mediating layer between any two people or machines, or any group of people and machines, for any data in any pattern. And right, if you tried to figure out, if I went to you and said, how do you publish a magazine over the phone? You would have to say, you can't publish a magazine over the phone. That's not what phones are for. How do I print a phone? How do I print a conversation on a printing press? You can't do it, right? Voice is not for the printing press. The fact that all of those restrictions are gone, right, the simplicity of the internet actually removes the old possibilities, or removes the old constraints rather, means that things like Wikipedia, which were impossible because of the restrictions, now suddenly become not just imaginable, but doable, right? It's both simple to have a new idea in relative terms, and also simple to build the first version of it, the so-called 1.0 version. And Ward Cunningham, the inventor of wikis, did it as a little project for a community that he had in the West Coast of programmers that wanted to share tips. It was so simple. There was almost nothing there. It's a very simple way to build and then share pages, and it got better and more evolved a little bit at a time until we have the Wikipedia we know. But every point in those 12 years, every additional observation and improvement was also simple, and that's really the secret, I think, is start simple, stay simple, and evolve to as many different cases as you can get to.
We have always loved one another. We're human. It's something we're good at. But up until recently, the radius and half-life of that affection has been quite limited. With love alone, you can get a birthday party together. Add coordinating tools, and you can write an operating system. In the past, we would do little things for love, but big things required money. Now, we can do big things for love.
The talk at Supernova really comes down also to the question in a way about Wikipedia, which is one thing that made Wikipedia possible is removing the technological constraints. But the other thing that made it possible is enabling people's affection for one another to be expressed in all kinds of concrete ways. We're very used to a world in which people who are near and dear to us, family and friends, but even colleagues that we enjoy working with, that we do things for those people that aren't motivated by money or part of our jobs. But the sphere in which those relationships work is very small, and the time scale is very limited. And we're used to really big projects being taken on by governments or corporations. And what the internet has given us is an environment in which the radius and half-life of love, as it were, is much larger. People can now do things for love that previously would have required money. And what that means now is that the motivations we've always had to pay attention to one another, to care for one another, to build things of value together, now instead of it being about having a birthday party for your friends, now it is really about building these giant resources that are valuable to millions of people every day, but just doing it out of this personal motivation. And that, to me, setting the technology aside, that enabling of social structure so that caring about and wanting to take care of and loving other people suddenly becomes world-class infrastructure. That's new. That's a great moment. In a way, of everything I've seen in the sort of 15 years I've been doing this, that observation is the one that continues to be both revolutionary and to me exciting, because there's been so little place for love in a market context, in a global context, right? You keep it at home, and now it's spilling out into the streets. And absolutely, they do. I teach at a graduate institution at NYU, and my students are 10, 15 years younger than me, and I see them adopting things in ways that are absolutely native to them. I look at the technology, they look at it, but they immediately make connections, because the key advantage the young have over people my age and older is that they don't have to unlearn anything, right? It's all new to them. And so when something gets invented, when something comes along like the web, right, people my age sort of have to say, oh, this is new, we're going to have to factor this in, right? If you're 15 when the web gets invented, it's an ordinary part of life. And so I think that the assumption that things can be linked, that they can be found easily wherever they are, that they can be accessed easily, and that they can be shared easily, those are all metaphors that are moving from, as you say, from the electronic layer up into the social layer. They're just expectations now that people have of their lives with one another, and people are rebuilding their social lives around those kinds of assumptions. I mean, as has been widely noted, the big question about social networks and identity is all of a sudden my identities are collapsing into a single point. It is one of the oldest observations in the history of social science that people behave differently in the church than the bar, even if you're with the same people. And so the environment you're in and the question of reputation and behavior has all been kept separate by the real world. The church is over here and the bar is over there. Well, once everything is linked and collapsed, right, if I have my profile on Facebook or on MySpace or what have you, and I say, right, I'm a college professor and I'm a huge hip-hop fan, right, my students don't know that it doesn't really matter to anything I do for them. The people I listen to music with don't really know what I do for a living, and all of a sudden there it is, it's all together. And in a way, partly we will have to find ways to continue to express our identity differently in different spaces. Some of that maybe the technology will get better. In the same way that privacy controls came in on the wave of user demand, I think segmenting of identity is coming. But some of it too is a new set of social bargains, right? That it's maybe just going to be not okay for an employer to go after every detail they can find about you on Google because it's too much information and it's none of their business. How that gets regulated, what part is technology, what part is law, what part is just social bargain, huge unsolved question. But I think everybody now realizes that it's one of the big sort of social tectonic plates, right? We can either do this a little bit at a time, or we can wait for a long time and then have a social earthquake of some sort. I'm hoping, obviously, we do it a little bit at a time, but in any case, it's a matter to be worked out. Yeah, privacy is so weird because there's a big conversation about opt-in versus opt-out, right? Did you ask me to show me this ad, or do I say you can't show me an ad until I tell you every time? But by the time you're having the opt-in versus opt-out conversation, you've already blown past the much older pattern, which is don't ask. Just don't ask me. The principal guarantor of privacy for most of the 20th century wasn't rights or privileges, it was inconvenience, right? It was hard to violate people's privacy. Yeah, we had microphones, yeah, we had cameras, but it wasn't like you could watch everybody all the time. And now it's getting like that, right? And so privacy, however the opt-in versus opt-out conversation goes, the really major shift is privacy from the sort of thing that you could just take for granted as a side effect of surveillance being inconvenient and expensive, to privacy is something that I have to say, this is the line, don't cross it, I'm going to mark my boundary like this. And already by making it an active and argued for concept, we've transformed it. Because now it's much less like the commons, right? We all can walk down the street, and yes, we're observable, but basically we're unobserved. Now it becomes like owning a parcel of property, where if you don't want to be observed, you have to take active steps. I mean, one of the thought exercises is, imagine trying to walk, 1,500 meters through any major city without being photographed once. I mean, it's almost inconceivable, right? I mean, you could pick a slum in Mumbai, but if you're walking through New York or London or Munich or whatever, someone is taking your picture. And that's a big change. And because we never had to talk about privacy before, that change has basically taken place under our noses. And the conversation is much more fixated on opt-in versus opt-out than on this business of whether we have to ask for or demand privacy in the first place. And that, to me, that transformation is both the much bigger deal, because if you're doing opt-in versus opt-out, you can change your mind later potentially. But the transformation of privacy from passive to active is already basically finished, and we never really had a conversation about it. So my most optimistic view is that a number of good things that come out of just basic sharing of information and collaboration revitalize society in two ways. First of all, everyone is a genius in some way, right? In the sense that we all have access to information that Isaac Newton or Johannes Kepler would have pulled their teeth out to get hold of, and we can get it instantly. I was walking with my son. He's 6 years old. We're walking into school, talking about his homework, and he says, "Daddy, I forgot. I need a list of animals in Ethiopia." I was like, for a minute, I was like, you need that in half an hour. What am I going to do about this? And then I realized, there's an open Wi-Fi network in the school cafeteria. So we sit down, we open it up, we type some stuff into Google. It's like, oh look, here's a Galata baboon, there's an ibex, an ayal, and he's writing it all down. 2 years ago, given that it's based on Wi-Fi in this particular cafeteria, inconceivable. So that is fantastic. And the other part of the optimistic view is it also puts people in contact with one another. Right? Last night I went to a Munich bloggers meetup. Right? It's one of these events designed to get people away from their computers and out into bars and cafes, sitting face to face. And as the internet starts to pervade daily life, it actually can be a source less of social disconnection than social connection. So I'm hoping for that revitalization of social capital, and I know a number of people working on trying to make it happen. So that is another optimistic scenario. Here's the pessimistic scenario. There's this thing called the pro-ana movement, pro-anorexia, and it's this group of girls who formed a self-help group in a way, for getting or remaining dangerously thin by choice. And they use the language of self-help, even though obviously what they're doing is remaining sick. There's an enormous number of behaviors that society has kept kind of tamped down because you used to need social permission for a group to form. And so we could have Alcoholics Anonymous, we could have groups for helping alcoholics stop being drunk all the time. But the pro-ana kids couldn't form an equivalent group because no one would give them a basement to meet in, and no one would let them take out ads in the newspaper. Right? There were all these social filters to the formation of groups. Those filters are gone. Any group that wants to form to a first approximation can form. Al-Qaeda, of course, is the canonical example, but it's on the social dimension that I think people are still being surprised by. So the most pessimistic view is really that the entertainment and content industries, what have you, succeed in clamping down the sharing of information, so that in a way the only groups The only group that are able to make use of the internet are these marginalized and antisocial groups, rather than it being part of the whole fabric of society. So I'm obviously hoping for the former and not the latter, but as everything, it's an open question.
Einmal mehr schwebt eine Frage im Raum.
Selbst sei nur ist, wenn du deine Meinung in Kommentarfelder, aber nicht auf die Straße trägst.
Vielen Dank. Und das, liebe Zuschauer, war es auch schon wieder für heute. Ich verabschiede mich und wünsche Ihnen eine inspirierte Woche. Bleiben Sie uns gewogen und schalten Sie auch das nächste Mal wieder ein. Bis dahin bleibe ich Ihr elektrischer Reporter.
Filter und Wertesysteme sind die Reflexzonen unserer Weltdeutung. Gleichzeitig ist die Sozialisation und Initiation in eine Weltdeutungskultur Garant dafür, dass gesehen wird, was gesehen werden muss. Solange gesellschaftliche Veränderungen langsamer als die Entwicklung der Weltmodelle erfolgte, ging das noch an. Was aber, wenn sich die Veränderungen in Zyklen einstellen, die der Modellentwicklung keine Zeit lässt? Die Deutungen werden bizarr. Was gestern noch ein funktionierendes Vergrößerungsglas war, kann unter den heutigen beschleunigten Bedingungen zum Kirmesspiegel werden.